Medulloblastomas are the most common type of cancerous brain tumor in children. In this video, we'll give you a visual mnemonic to help you remember all the important facts about medulloblastomas so you'll be ready for test day. You're just in time for the ceremony where this recently returned veteran is being awarded a medal for his service. He's even got that firecracker in his hand so he can blast some celebratory fireworks into the sky. This veteran's medal, along with the blast of fireworks, should help you remember medulloblastoma. Medal for medullo, and blast for blastoma. Medulloblastomas are a type of malignant brain tumor. We have a lot to cover for this tumor, but let's find out where this tumor comes from. First, take a look at that carving of a primitive head by this veteran's feet. Must be a souvenir this guy picked up while serving abroad. Let this primitive head carving remind you of the primitive neuroectoderm, because the neuroectoderm makes you think of the brain or head, and those carvings on the top of the statue kind of even look like a brain, right? And this is a primitive head or brain carving for the primitive neuroectoderm. Medulloblastomas arrive from the primitive neuroectoderm, which is the embryonic or immature tissue that eventually forms the brain. Due to this origin, medulloblastomas are also known as primitive neuroectodermal tumors, or PNETs for short. This ceremony is such a big deal that they've even hired the local symphony to play a fanfare. See the director standing just under the stage holding silver bells in his hand? These silver bells are our recurring symbol for the cerebellum, or the silverbellum, if we may. Medulloblastomas are commonly found in the cerebellum of the posterior fossa of the brain. They are particularly known to affect the cerebellar vermis, which is the middle structure that connects the left and right cerebellar hemispheres. Although this is low yield, I do want to mention that medulloblastomas can also cause a spread of the tumor called drop metastasis. This is named because the tumor literally drops from the cerebellum of the brain above to affect the spinal cord below. This spread is thought to occur through the cerebrospinal fluid that connects the two locations. Again, this is a bit of a low-yield detail. You really should focus on just the cerebellum itself as the main location of medulloblastomas. You've probably noticed that this ceremony is taking place during the day. Here at Pixarize, we use daytime to represent childhood, while nighttime represents adulthood, because children are like the day, bright and full of energy, and the adulthood that comes later is, well, you know. And of course, this veteran's welcome has to occur during the day, right? Use this image of the bright daytime sun to remind you that medulloblastomas are common in childhood. In fact, they're the most common cancerous brain tumor in children. If you generalize it to both cancerous and benign brain tumors, they're the second most common in children, after pilocytic astrocytomas, which we cover in a different video. Got that? Now that we've covered who this tumor affects, let's move on to the clinical presentation and symptoms seen in patients with medulloblastoma. Whoops. It looks like this veteran was too excited about his medal to notice that he blasted the firework directly into the poor conductor. That conductor sure looks pretty angry. See that cartoonish steam coming out of his ears? Let this steaming, pressurized head remind you of increased intracranial pressure, or ICP. Because it certainly looks like this guy's head is under increased pressure, if you catch my drift. Patients with medulloblastoma commonly present with signs of increased intracranial pressure. This happens due to the expansion of the brain tumor in the closed space of our skull, which obviously increases the pressure inside the head. This increased pressure can damage the brain and lead to other findings. Let's touch on that next. Take a look at that conductor's bulging forehead vein. This bulging forehead vein should make it easy to recall headaches, since one symptom of increased ICP is headache. This should be really easy to understand. A growing mass in the brain can push on and damage neighboring brain tissue to cause pain inside the head. A somewhat differentiating symptom here is the presence of morning headaches in patients, since most other types of headaches tend to occur later in the day as opposed to the morning. A morning headache that occurs consistently day after day should make you think of a brain tumor. Finally, notice this conductor's bulging eyes. Yup, he's pretty shocked that a returning hero would act so carelessly with that firecracker. These bulging eyes should help you remember papilledema, which is another sign of increased intracranial pressure. You know, since papilledema is just a fancy term for a swollen optic nerve visible when the back of the eye is viewed under a fundoscope, this swelling of the optic nerve is due to buildup of fluid caused by increased intracranial pressure, and may eventually result in visual impairment if not corrected. This conductor got knocked off his feet by the blast from that firecracker. See how he's stumbling around after losing his balance? The stumbling should help you remember ataxia, because ataxia refers to impaired balance or coordination, right? Besides increased ICP, patients with medulloblastoma can also present with ataxia. This happens usually due to damage to the cerebellum, which is responsible for coordination and balance. And the tumor generally arises in the cerebellum, so cerebellar dysfunction should be pretty easy to rationalize. Patients with ataxia are typically characterized by a broad-based gait and impaired ability to touch their nose with their finger, which are both findings of poor coordination. Got that? Now that we've covered some of the clinical symptoms of medulloblastoma, we can move on to discussing what to expect in terms of histology. I'm sure this veteran's family is super excited to finally have him home. His kid's even on stage with him to welcome him back. See that big basket of blueberries he's holding? Maybe they're freshly hand-picked as a welcome gift from the family's farm. Anyway, these small blueberries should help you remember small blue cells. You can expect to see sheets of these small blue cells on a brain biopsy, or surgically removed sample from a medulloblastoma. These small, round cells are the primitive neuroectodermal tumor cells we spoke about earlier, and these cells stain mostly blue or basophilic on H&E due to their prominent nuclei and scant cytoplasm. Here's one way to think about why this happens. Primitive cells contain genetic DNA in their nuclei, but being so primitive, they don't actually have the time to grow and make proteins, hence the lack of cytoplasm and their small size. Since the nuclei tend to stain blue, this explains their blue color. These small blue cells also have a high mitotic index, meaning the cells divide extremely quickly. You may even see several cells in the act of splitting in your microscope slide. Next, take a look at that big bouquet of roses that kid is holding to welcome his dad back home. Well, these welcome home roses are our symbol for the Homer Wright rosettes. Get it? Welcome home for Homer Wright and roses for rosettes. Homer Wright rosettes are another finding seen in samples from medulloblastomas under the microscope. The Homer Wright rosette describes a characteristic appearance of tumor cells arranged in a ring around a central region containing neuropil, which are basically glial and nerve fibers. This makes a little flower-like pattern called a rosette. The specific rosettes formed by these small blue cells are called Homer Wright rosettes. I hate eponyms just as much as the next person, but hey, I don't write the test, alright? We just try to make things a little easier to remember. You can probably guess that this veteran is pretty high-ranked, judging by all these festivities they put up to welcome him back. I guess that's why he deserves this solid gold medal. See how he's biting the metal to show it's made of solid gold? This image should help you remember that medulloblastomas are solid tumors. Solid gold for solid tumors. Medulloblastomas have a solid or non-cystic appearance on gross pathology. This means that if you do surgery to take the tumor out of someone's head and then cut it lengthwise, you'll end up with a solid mass without any holes in the middle. Contrast this against pilocytic astrocytoma, which is another brain tumor that usually has cysts or holes in its gross appearance. I hope this conductor gets his bearings soon, because we're set to play at any minute. That's right, I'm actually a member of this symphony that's been hired to play at this guy's ceremony. And symphony obviously stands for synaptophysin. Symphony for synaptophysin. Medulloblastoma stains synaptophysin positive on histology. Synaptophysin is a glycoprotein that's used as a marker for primitive neuroendocrine cells. Interestingly, the primitive neuroectodermal tumor cells of medulloblastomas stain well with synaptophysin. Just remember this symphony, and you won't forget to connect synaptophysin to medulloblastomas. Okay, we've now covered what to expect on a medulloblastoma biopsy. Before we wrap up, though, let's briefly cover some low-yield treatments. Surgical removal or resection is the main treatment for medulloblastoma. Radiation or chemotherapy are also commonly used as follow-up treatments to kill any remaining tumor cells. Note that treatments are quite specific to the individual case, so it's highly unlikely you'll be tested about them on test day. Alright, we're finally done covering medulloblastomas. Let's review what we've learned. Medulloblastomas are malignant tumors that come from primitive neuroectoderm cells. They commonly arise in the cerebellum, and they may occasionally spread to the spinal cord below in what is known as a drop metastasis. Medulloblastomas are usually found in children and are actually the most common malignant brain tumor in children. Patients affected usually exhibit signs of increased intracranial pressure, like headaches and papilledema, as well as ataxia due to cerebellar dysfunction. A histopathological assessment will reveal a solid, non-cystic appearance on gross pathology, with sheets of small blue cells forming Homer-Wright rosettes under the microscope. These tumors also stain synaptophysin positive. Okay, now we're really done with medulloblastomas. I should probably get tuned up to play. I gotta create the best soundtrack for your sky-high test score. See you in the next one.